Hello, everyone. Hi, students, educators, anyone who's on. Welcome to We'll Be Brief, our beautiful panel about writing short stories. I'm Anna Meriano. I am the author of some books, including but not limited to short stories and a couple of anthologies, like this one, Living Beyond Borders. I'll be moderating this beautiful panel. We'll be talking about all things short story. And let's go ahead and get started by introducing all of our beautiful panelists. Who would like to start?
I'll hop in. Hi, everyone. My name is Maika Muli. I am one half of the sister author duo. I write with my sister Margarita Muli, who should be watching. I'm looking for your comment. And I have written lots of young adult books, and we're going to be talking about Our Shadows Have Claws today and our short story in that called Beware the Empty Subway Car. Hi, everybody.
Oh, Margarita, I think you're muted. But you're welcome to go next.
I'm Margarita Longoria. I am a high school librarian, and I'm the editor of Living Beyond Borders. Can you show it, Anna? Because I don't have a copy. Yay! That's our anthology. It's called Living Beyond Borders, Growing Up Mexican in America, and it was probably one of the most exciting things that I have ever done, getting this amazing group of writers together to produce this amazing book of short stories and collections of beautiful stories. So that's me. Thank you.
Ari, you want to go next?
Yes, thanks, Anna. I'm Ari Tyson. I'm a poet and author of forthcoming YA novel Scenes of the Household, which I don't have a picture of yet, but I also am a contributor in Our Shadows Have Claws, which Hika is part of too. And I am the author of Bloodkin in that short story anthology. And I'm forthcoming in a few others, including Relit, which is also a Latin American retelling anthology of classic literature. So I'm super pumped to be here, and I'm really excited for all the students here as well. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Camille Gomez-Tavarez. I'm the author of High Spirits, a short story anthology for young adult readers, centered around a single family in the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, New York City, Paterson, New Jersey, and each story sort of follows a different family member in this one extended family. All the stories are kind of about machismo and dealing with, family and identity. So yeah, that's my book, and it just came out in Spanish as well, translated by Lorraine Avila, who's another Dominican writer.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm very excited for the upcoming, there's so many good Latinx anthologies, Latine anthologies that are out or coming out or have just come out, which is great to hear about. The retellings I'm especially excited about because I've just been working on that story. So everyone, I wanted to start off because I know we've got a lot of classrooms joining us today. I wanted to start out by asking you, what do you like about short stories as a reader? We're going to talk a lot about writing short stories and the craft of short stories, but let's put on our reader hats for a minute and talk about what do you like about short stories? Why are they fun? What's good about them? Convince our classroom friends.
I go. Oh, Margarita, you could go first, actually.
Oh, I was going to say, I love short stories. I was a classroom teacher for many, many years. I taught 8th grade reading, and all we did in my class was read. So I love to read. I used to love to read novels with my kids, but a lot of times we just didn't have the time for the novel because we have testing. There's all these crazy things that go on in the public school education. So to make my kids like to read and to make them, and I love short stories because you can get involved in a short story and you can read it all from cover to cover or from start to finish. And it's not like a novel where you have to invest a lot of time in, which I love to do too. And most readers do, but we do have reluctant readers, and we do have the classroom setting where we need to get in and get out and get on with our lives, but to give our students something that's meaningful and important and good. So that's what I love about short stories. They're perfect for the English classroom, and they're perfect for classrooms in general.
I love short stories because first, it's so weird. Like, even though I'm like, I'm still a reader, but I also have like my author hat always working in the background. So I like to read short stories to be like, so I can learn. For me, I'm just like, how are you able to tell a story with a compelling beginning, middle, and end in so few words? Because I'm very verbose. So I just love to see that. And I like commend authors who write in the short story format, aka commending myself because it was hard. But yeah, I just love
We all deserve.
Yeah. But I love reading short stories. And it's also great to see how one theme can mean so many different things to everybody else, and like trying to see the threads of like how closely they are tied together or not. I love that.
I think I love short stories because I have not been a very fast reader despite being a writer. And so I love anything that kind of I guess I can sit down and finish in a short amount of time, but also because they're short, I get to dive in a little bit deeper and take my time. Yeah, I don't know. As a reader, I always feel pressure to read faster, but I feel like Jacqueline Woodson talks about how she was a slow reader and she would put her finger underneath each line, kind of a thing. And so I feel like short stories remind me that it's okay to go down. It's okay to just enjoy a story and not feel like I have to get to the end pages. So that's, yeah, definitely as a reader, I love getting to slow down and not feel like I have to finish a novel or, turn the page super fast, but I just get to sink into the story.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a similar thing, Ari, that just like the satisfaction of like finishing a thing feels really good as a reader. And it's just like, I don't know, it also is more open for like experimental types of things. And you can sort of get into like different genres maybe that you wouldn't usually get into because there's like a lot less at stake, I feel like. Because if you don't like it, then you just finish the short story, but you could still sort of learn something from any short story that you go to. I feel like they're so also like focused, and like every sentence and line like means something and has something of significance because there's such a small canvas and space. So that's really cool as well, just having that opportunity to be very intentional and focused with every line because you don't have any to spare.
Yeah, and thank you, Camille. I love how that pretty much answer could have equally answered as a reader or as a writer, because that is one of the cool things about short stories when you're taking them in, but also like when you're working on them. I love to use short stories as a chance to experiment with things that I wouldn't necessarily have done or felt comfortable doing in a novel yet. And pivot. What drew you all to short stories in your writing? Was it an editor like Margarita who just reached out and was like, please write me a short story? Or did you come up with the idea on your own? Or what got you into writing short stories? Or into, I guess, editing a short story anthology?
So I am a part of Las Musas, whoop whoop, a Latinx marketing collective, and I feel like an advertisement. But I love Las Musas, and I got an email from Amparo and Jamile, and they asked me and Maritza if we would want to, and especially as Haitian authors, Haitian American authors, it's not always that that Haitian people have been included as Latino, Latine folks. So that's really cool that we're always considered in that way. And so when they approached us saying like, we would love to have you all be a part of our Latinx horror anthology, Haitian people, we got a lot of horror stories. So I was like, oh, which monster are we going to bring into this? And we got the opportunity to talk about the loup-garou, which is the Haitian equivalent of the werewolf, but it's more of a shape-shifting creature, as you will read, hopefully, and be scared in the story.
I'm going to piggyback off of that too. As well. I think the ask too from the editors of Our Shadows Have Claws was a big thing for me. Though traditionally, so I'm Indigenous, and our stories, we love storytelling. It's a big part of our culture, sitting down, having chocolate at night, sitting in hammocks and telling stories. It's a big thing. And some of those are definitely spooky stories. Like there are snakes that attack people who might harm children or things like that. They're all like good stories, but they're a little spooky, right? So this was a really exciting to work on Bloodkin, which is a panther story of a panther queen. And she has the ability to transform like her ancestors did. And so, again, it was a really cool opportunity. Short stories give you a chance to maybe explore something in a bigger way than what you could have before. But yeah, as a writer, it's kind of fun because our tradition, usually our stories are something that you could tell in one night, right? Rather than it's, you know, a traditional Western novel that lasts for a really long time. And so I think the short story really fits really nicely craft wise with some oral storytelling structures. So I had a lot of fun getting to weave that into this translation or this retelling in Our Shadows.
Yeah, for me, I didn't, I contribute. So I just wrote a whole bunch of short stories that all sort of fit the same theme and go together. Largely from like my thesis in college. A couple of the short stories are from that thesis. And I was, in a classroom setting, again, like especially in a workshop setting, short stories are something that, we work with often so that you can quickly get feedback from your peers and everything. And it was one of the first stories I wrote was Stickball, which was about a man who sort of goes back to his childhood and has these like fits where he's like transported through time in his memories. And that was inspired by my dad, who used to get like my grandma said he had like a demon inside of him and she had to like exorcise it from him. But he used to just like go off into space when he was a child a lot and get like possessed. So like after I wrote that and got the feedback from my classroom, it seemed like everyone was very like excited and into it more than like anything I'd ever written before. And I had a lot more ideas around like a similar theme. And I was already writing things and I was like, oh, these all have a similar thing going on and they seem to be in the same universe. So that's what sort of inspired me to, actually like put them together into a collection. And I just kept having more and more ideas. So when I was approached to make it into a book, I was like, yeah, I have like a list of ideas that I just am waiting to get to. So it was a great opportunity.
I think again, as an English teacher, I loved the short story because they were so wonderful for our class. But at the time that I was teaching English, there wasn't a lot of short stories, culturally relevant short stories for my classes where I taught. So I fast forward a couple of years. I haven't been a teacher for a little bit, but I wanted to do this collection because I wanted to put together a collection of short stories, poems, essays, things that will about Mexican American culture for the world to see inside our culture the way it really is. Mirrors and windows, not necessarily the stereotypical stories that you see about Mexicans on TV and stuff. I wanted these stories to be authentic. And as a contributor, and how I find my contributors was I read their stuff. Like I loved her little middle grade series, the Sugar Magic ones. They're so beautiful. They're the cutest book. I just fell in love with the stories that she wrote. So I was like, I didn't know Anna. And I was like, I'm going to email her and just see if she wants to be in my book. And I was just so lucky that I did. I emailed her and she said yes. So she has a wonderful story in our collection that a lot of people love. And it's like this powerful feminist story. And it's an amazing story. So thank you, Anna, for contributing to Living Beyond Borders. But that's what drew me to short stories, that you get all these voices, these different beautiful voices, diverse voices that have like the same theme and goal in mind. And I think that's what's beautiful about the short story, like the anthologies.
And thank you also, Margarita, for, emailing me like, I loved your sweet middle grade fantasy novel. And I was like, cool, I'm going to write the angstiest thing I've ever written.
But I
YA.
loved it. It was perfect for YA. It was
dark and serious.
Yes. Thank you.
Which brings us back to that sort of, you get to do new things. Since you were just talking about putting together the anthology, I kind of wanted to focus on this side of the screen for a minute and ask Camille and Margarita, how did you do it? Because I've been on the side of writing a short story. I've never been on the side of organizing a short story collection or anthology. How do you turn a group of short stories or a group of ideas that you have of like, they all have a similar theme, or just the theme itself and you're reaching out to people? How do you turn that into a coherent collection? What organizational strategies did you use? Tell us how that worked.
I don't have organizational strategies. This is this book that we put together, Anna, was a work of like, it was serendipitous something, because like it wasn't, I don't even know how it got came. I'm very blessed and I'm very lucky. I feel that everybody that's in this book, I loved their work. So I approached people that I loved their work. So, and I asked them, some said yes, some said no. And I kind of, then y'all gave me these amazing stories. And I remember every time I would get a story in my inbox, I was like, how is this my life? How is it? Oh my God, this is so perfect. If I get 20 perfect stories like that, and I got 20 perfect stories. It was crazy. I still can't believe it. I still pinch myself like, how did this happen? But that's, I feel that it's more like a work of heart. Like, this is what I wanted in my heart. I wanted this for the world. I wanted this for our community. It was so important to me to fight back against all the ugly things, the hateful words that were being said about the Mexicans and the Mexican Americans. And I thought like and that's what it was. It was this drive in my heart and in my soul. And I was like, I'm going to get these wonderful people together and we're going to produce something beautiful out of all this hate. And that's what it was. And like I said, it just kind of, I had this amazing agent and then I had this amazing editor. And it's just like, I feel very blessed. And that's why I try to give back and because sometimes I don't know how to repay the beautiful thing that we put together, because it was magical almost. So that's how you do it with magic.
Yeah, I kind of I come from like the art world, or like I went to art school, so it kind of sounds like, being a curator or like curating like an exhibition, and you're sort of picking things that like look nice next to each other on a wall. So that's really like interesting for me. Like writing all of them and like deciding how to put them together. There's definitely like a thread throughout of like from the first character, the main character Gabriel, who's the one who gets sort of possessed, appears like at the beginning, in the middle, and then at the end. And so that was like sort of a thread to keep things kind of together, because some people don't like reading short story collections because they don't like how everything's all, discombobulated. But to try to keep some semblance of like a storyline throughout the stories, that's what I did and tried to focus on. And then like whenever I got lost, my like North Star was just like, okay, like the word like on the wall is like toxic masculinity, and like what is another way that like that shows up in life, and in Dominican culture specifically, which is what I was trying to write about, and bring to light, because I didn't see myself in a lot of books that were like presented to me. Like I didn't really see myself in Juno Diaz or like Julia Alvarez. So something that was like Afro-Dominican, that like showed this side of my family, that had these particular, cultures. And like I noticed that, like growing up, like we have different practices in terms of like funerals and like, just different sort of religious things that we do, because my family's from near the border in Haiti. So yeah. And yeah, so like just looking at that North Star of like toxic masculinity was just like, okay, like where do I see it? Like at the barbershop. Where do you see it when you're like on the women's side of that? Like what if there's just two girls talking? Like how does toxic masculinity creep into like their conversation? So yeah, that was like the thing that I tried to keep in mind a lot of the time. And right now I'm writing like a full-length novel, and it's like a whole different experience because I've never written something long. I'm so used to writing everything short, but I'm trying to sort of keep that in mind too, of like what are the main themes of this thing, and like how does this particular chapter or thing relate to that, and if it doesn't, then maybe I should scrap it. But yeah.
I love how you both had like your kind of guiding star of like we're gonna have joy and stories, or we're gonna have toxic masculinity. I guess that's how you do it. Fascinating. Camille, I didn't know you were working on a novel. That makes my next question relevant to you as well. So all of my novel writers, no, this side and down. I wanted to ask, how does your process change for short stories versus novels? Maika, Ari, and Camille, you've all worked on novels as well. I'm right? I did some research. Okay. And I wanted to ask specifically, talk about anything you want to about process, but specifically, do you think that there are some ideas that are just short story ideas, like they just need to be in that format, and there's something that just need to be novels? Or do you think it's more about the execution? You can turn any idea into one or the other. That's something I always wonder about my short stories and novels.
That's a great question. Okay, so first, Maritza and I, we write together, and so we always have to know, like, what is the idea, like what is sparking this? And because we knew that this was a Latinx horror anthology, we were like, okay, it was for us, it was between La Sirene, which is a mermaid. Yes, mermaids can be Black, or Lugau, which was the werewolf. And so we ended up going with the werewolf because we feel like we have a story about La Sirene, the mermaid, that could be longer. And so there are definitely, I don't know, I think there are nuances in how you approach a short story versus how you approach, a full length novel. But since Marissa and I work together, we just kind of have to like talk through things. But I will say for short stories, we aren't as, I don't want to say rigid, but we aren't as rigid in how we use our outline. When we're writing a novel, we have a very extensive outline. There are so many words in it. Maritza and I have to know where the story is going, and so that we can write separately and that it's still a cohesive story. But I don't know, for a short story, we're just like, what's the idea? How does it end? Okay. And then we just go in and start writing. And then the other person goes in and starts writing. And then you just kind of go through and you're like, oh, we're at the word limit. Now, what do we have to cut? And that's kind of how we work. I feel like writing in short story has brought back a lot of the, like, that first joy of like writing before you are a published author, like when you're writing that first book and you're just like, I'm writing because I love writing. And then, you don't have the contractual obligations. So I feel like the short story, although there are contractual obligations, it allows us to kind of get more into this. We're just telling a story. And because it's shorter, it feels more like you're talking with a friend, like, girl, let me tell you about la, 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 la. And it just happens to be a spooky story.
I love that. I love that. Well, I think the kind of difference for me is when I think about novel writing, and right, if we were to think about, a story about going to high school as a freshman, right? Like that story is going to take a while, right? It's a story that probably, it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of different threads. There's going to be lots of different things going on, maybe back home, what's going on at school, navigating different spaces like that, right? Tons of different themes or kind of fringes to then braid together to create a story. I think for a short story in particular, right, there are different moments in life that are where we grow or change in a shorter amount of time than, let's say, going to being a freshman in high school, right? There might be a moment where, we go to a camp over the weekend, and maybe that is more transformational to us or something like that, right? So I think about that with short stories, right? Generally, I'm wanting to see my character change or grow. And so there needs to be kind of a big enough moment for them to change or transform in a short story that can happen in a shorter amount of time. With a novel, I'd have more room and space to kind of build and weave. But so I think that there's a difference in that way. Like, what is my character needing to change? And sometimes there are those moments where maybe she literally is turning into a panther, or maybe my character needs a lot of time to kind of bake and cope through abuse, which is what Saints of the Household is. Very different stories, right? They're demanding different things in terms of their craft. So I think it kind of mimics life in a way, right? There are things that take us a long time to heal and grow through, and then sometimes we do get to grow in those moments that we remember, right? Those moments tend to be even more memorable, I think, sometimes than the longer narratives of our lives.
Yeah, I would say like similarly, like you were saying before, like Micah, like if it is something that like where even I feel like it's like a tapestry, like a short story is kind of like a single thread through it, and you're like really focused on like a moment through it. It doesn't mean that it can't be like a part of like a larger thing if you do want to like expand it. But I do feel like, especially when I'm writing short stories, I'm often like thinking about like the end first and like making sure that like everything like closes off nicely and is like satisfying in the end, versus like writing my novel, like every step of everything, like I have note cards on the wall. It's like a murder mystery sort of thing of like collecting things. Whereas in like that short story thing, it's a lot more just straightforward of like knowing where I'm beginning and like where I'm ending. And then I'm sort of just like writing my way to that ending. And yeah, I feel like a lot of the times, like focusing on like those small moments, like if like it's like a lot of my stuff were like from memories. So like, you know, when like I don't know, like I got an ice cream or something like from my grandparents, like it's like a specific small moment that like usually has like a very specific emotion tied to it, and sort of is grounded in like that reality. So it's kind of just like putting a magnifying glass on like a very small thing versus like in a novel, I feel like I'm just like following a person's life throughout a small, significant chunk of it. But yeah, I think either has like its strengths and drawbacks, but definitely, like Micah was saying, short story, I feel like more free to do whatever, because it's more like it doesn't matter because nothing has to connect to anything else. I don't have to like, you know, make sure there's continuity things. So yeah.
Camille, you keep doing my transitions for me because I'm like, yes, let's talk about experimenting. But also, we had a comment from Rebecca saying like, oh, I'm going to tell that to my students. And yeah, I'm often trying to explain to my students like, okay, this is flash fiction. You have to pick like one tiny feeling. This is a short story. You pick one moment of change. Or we're starting a novel, so you get to plan out the whole thing. If you've done, any of you watching, if you've done like the watermelon versus the seed of your personal memoir, that kind of thing, short stories are the seed. But that being said, I did also want to talk about short stories as this place to experiment. And I wanted to ask you, what experiments have you done or seen in short stories that you've edited or written? Whether it's, you know, second person, doing.
We're leading that in.
Yeah. I'm trying not to spoil Bloodkin. Characters doing something that you don't expect your main character to do. I didn't know how else to phrase that. Flashbacks, although I think that's pretty common, or even an open ending. What experiments have you done or seen? And are there any of those lessons that you've learned from doing it in a short story that you would carry into a larger novel? Just as an example, I have a short story. We'll see how it goes because it's been turned in, but it hasn't been edited yet. But I have a short story where I just have a character with no pronouns, because my main character wouldn't have known their pronouns, and I didn't have any way for them to assume. So I was like, you know what? It's only a couple pages. I can avoid using a pronoun for a couple pages.
I love that.
I don't know that I would do that in an entirely long setting, though.
Yes. I'll just hop in. I've been hopping in first. I don't know. Sorry, y'all. Y'all could always cut me off. But so you mentioned it, but Maritza and I were like, what can we do to like really experiment? Because also we were thinking, we're like, you know, we're writing this short story in an anthology. What's something that we could do that if somebody's reading it, that they'll remember our story? And so we wrote in second person, which is when you're like, you walk in and you do this and blah, blah, blah. And I loved it. I don't know if we would ever write a book that was completely in second person, but writing it for the short story felt very much like we're bringing this person on this adventure. Like our character starts off in the New York subway, and then you get flashbacks to her being in Haiti, and then coming over. And like when you mentioned Anna, you mentioned pronouns. I don't think we mentioned her pronoun until later on or something like this, but we wanted the story to start for the person to not know what is happening and who is this you? Are they the, you know, like we wanted that little bit of disorientation as the reader went through it. So for us, it was writing in second person. And I don't know if anyone read this, but when I was younger, I used to read like those choose your own adventure books, like sometimes like Goosebumps would be like, you start off here or you do that. And I loved those. So it very much felt like we were like tapping into that. And I loved it. And we also had like, you know, an open-ended thing. Hopefully, you know, you can read it so you all can know too.
Okay, those choose your own adventures traumatized me. Sorry, Mark.
No, it's okay. Those were good stories. I remember, I think as an editor with my particular anthology, I remember asking like you, for instance, Anna, like I had read your stuff, and then, you know, this is what I was like, okay, and then you send me something that was kind of a little bit different than but it was still the same magical storytelling that you told, and I loved it for what it was that you gave us. The same thing with David Bowles. David writes a certain kind of story, and he writes for a certain group of and and then I asked him for a story, and then he sends me what he sent me, the Body by the Canal, and it was so different from what I had ever read by David Bowles, and that made me very happy just to have you guys in this collection, very different from what you guys usually were, or what you guys usually wrote in like your real life, or the real stuff, you know what I mean? So that was fun as an editor to have that kind of like surprises.
Yeah, I think for me, like there's one story, which is one that people talk about a lot, but where it's called Life After the Storm, where a character sort of becomes, I mean, it's like, I don't want to ruin the surprise, but sort of becomes his past female ancestors. And like writing that, like deciding to like write it again with the pronouns, since he's like multiple people, and there's like this gender thing going on, having them be like multiple and like saying they and them, but like meaning that in a plural sense, was like a cool thing to do, and that my editor let me do. And then also like I was reading a lot of like magical realism stuff from like a class in college, and they did like so many experimental things where you're like, again, disoriented, not sure like what's going on or where you are. So like Jose Lima's Paradiso was like one book that I had near me. There's like a Puerto Rican writer, Ana Lidia Vega, who like writes like phonetically and like in colloquial like Puerto Rican Spanish mixed with like English, and you have to know both in order to like understand the story. So definitely having her in mind, especially when it comes to like dialogue and stuff. Like I didn't write in like Spanish, I wrote in like slang, and like a lot of the things are like written phonetically, and sort of meant to be like read out loud because that's the way that you understand it. And I didn't really, when I was listening to the audiobook, I was like, wow, there's like whole chunks of this that are just in Spanglish. I was like, I really just like did that. But yeah, that was definitely one of the things that I was thinking about.
Yeah, since we're gonna switch into student questions pretty soon. Also, Ari, if you want to talk about language a little bit, as not that it was a huge part of Bloodkin, but it was there in that same way. And also, Maika and y'all's story had a little bit of Creole as well.
Yeah, I loved getting to include Bree. We have a lot of tones in Bree, and so I don't even know if we even got the final exact tone that needed to be in, because there's like, we stack them, right? There's like sometimes like 2 tones on top of each other. Like it's just really hard to get onto the Western page. Like I could write it down, right? But I can't print it on a Western page. So it's just kind of funny that way. But yeah, so that was really cool to get to include Bree for sure. Yeah, in terms of experimentation, I'll go a little bit off it because I know we don't have too much time, but I'm an autoethnographer, which means I study my own people group, and I sit down with my mentor and we tell stories and then I document them. And part of that is translation. So he speaks Bree in Spanish and English, and I mostly speak English, and I can speak some Spanish, like I can get by, and I'm working on Bree. But so it's really great. I get to do that translation work with my mentor. And so these stories that I'm getting to retell are stories that really have never been translated into English. And that's really a really big blessing. So in that way, it's already kind of naturally experimental in terms of our Western culture, right? These stories have never been kind of shared ever. And so that's like a really special move that I get to do. But I'm also super obsessed with craft. Really fun I'm working on a verse anthology right now, so a short story in verse, which is really hard. I'm a poet and also do verse novels, but doing a very short story in poetry where you already don't have as much space was a big challenge for me. So I really like that kind of space too. Like, what can a short story look like? What if it was in poetry? How would that change things, right? Yeah, so that's a little bit about the fun craft experimental side of things.
And really quickly, I just wanted to mention, because I know we have to move on to student questions. It was really important for us, Margarita and I, to include Haitian Creole in the anthology. A lot of times when folks think about Latin culture, we know Spanish for sure, but we don't really have opportunities to highlight Haitian Creole or even Portuguese, or, so that was like really important for us. So we have some words sprinkled in there that y'all know. Lugaru now, Tati means aunt, and there are, a few others in there.
Yeah, I thought that was a very cool part of getting to read the stories. Yeah, we're ready for student questions. Thank you all so much. These were all great answers. I want to talk about all of them, but let's see what everyone else is saying.
When you first get an idea for a story, how do you know if it will be better suited for a full-length novel or a short story?
Aha. From Amaya.
Amaya, that is a great question. I think it really comes down to how Maritza and I are feeling in the moment. Are we feeling spicy, like we got a lot of words to say? Or can we be brief, as it has the name of this panel? So yeah, it really comes down to us just kind of talking with one another and deciding, is this a short story or is this a full length story? Because I really feel like either or can be one. And as we've mentioned, it might be just zooming in on one part, because we're writing for another anthology now called The Black Girl Survives in this one. And already I feel like that short story that we're writing, it could be a full length.
I'm gonna piggyback off that. I think that it's really great to sometimes start with a short story and write it and see what happens, especially when you're a younger writer too, like when you're just starting, because I think it can be really hard to finish things. I just remember working on a novel for years, right? And it can be like, oh, this is taking forever, right? But as a young person, it's awesome to write a short story and be like, yeah, I'm gonna take this and maybe I can then also write this as a novel in the future. But just getting my craft down and practicing and working on things. But yeah, so I think that's also like I was talking to my agent actually, and I was like, I'm working on this short story, but I feel like it could be a novel in the future. And actually the one in Bloodkin actually kind of inspired a novel that I'm now working on now, which doesn't have the magical elements to it, but it has kind of this theme of environmental abuse towards environmentalists in my reservation. And so it oftentimes it is kind of like a seed. It can bloom other ideas and grow other places too, but it's still really important and really it's its own kind of craft thing that you can build your own skills with. So yeah, I think it can be both in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I was also gonna say, like, I think it's fair to say we don't always know when we first get the idea. I actually asked y'all this, a question about kind of differentiating between those two, because I had a short story that I was already writing when I was like, I think this is actually a novel. So, hey, friend who asked me to write a short story, I'll do something else for you because I think this is actually a novel. But I didn't know that until I was in it.
And my question is, how do you come up with your settings?
Settings from Lucia.
Thank you for that question, Lucia. I guess I can chime in. I think most of my settings are like set somewhere in real life. So like usually like the characters will sort of dictate like where they're going and like what they're gonna do. But I do feel like it's an important part, and I'd like to be like descriptive of like what's going on in the surroundings. But yeah, most of it, like especially if it's like in the Dominican Republic, coming from my own childhood memories, and like there's a place like the colmado or the corner store, and my grandfather owned a colmado, and so yeah, just pulling from like different memories of places I've been, and then like you're allowed to be more experimental, so like in dreams and stuff, I definitely pull from like different lores and like stories that I've been told like as a kid of like magical places, and then you just sort of get to paint a picture with words of like what that might look like. But yeah, definitely real life, and then a little bit of like dreams and stories.
I love the guinea pig. Didn't we all see that? That's just fabulous. Yes, I love doing research. So, and that sounds like it could be really boring. And I think if I go at it like I'm going to do research, it could be really boring. But sometimes I start writing the story and I'm like, oh, I want to know like what's on this island, right? This is the forthcoming short story that I'm working on. It takes place on an island that's actually real outside of our coast in Costa Rica, that actually Columbus landed on his fourth and final trip to Costa Rica, and then encountered my indigenous people group, and blossomed genocide and terrible things. But right, it's a really creepy kind of island. Nobody's settled on it yet. Like there's things that have happened on it literally in real life that are kind of spooky. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. I'm going to write about that island, like, because but if it wasn't for that research, I wouldn't have known that. Right. And I think that is is helpful to kind of let your curiosity take you away. So it's a retelling of Great Gatsby. And if you're familiar with like the eyes that are kind of overseeing the whole story in that book, well, I found out that there's also this kind of seabird that only lands there on our coast of Costa Rica because it's a small island that's remote that literally has yellow like orbital rings around their eyes. And I was like, this is wild, right? I was already doing this Great Gatsby retelling. Here's a little bit of research that I did on some seabirds, and now they are totally transforming my world. So I think research, if it's fun and exciting and you're thinking about it in that way, can be really great for building a setting as well.
Yeah, place plays a really important role in me and Maritza's stories. In addition to being an author, I'm a PhD student now at Howard University. And one of the things that we talk about is our public spaces. You know, there's lots of theories about public space, but especially for folks from marginalized groups, a lot of times our places are destroyed. They come, you know, lots of things happen. And so place becomes the people who are there and how they create meaning from that. And so when we write about Haiti, when we write about Miami, when we write about the empty subway car, it's important for us to highlight the space because it really makes the story richer. And so for us, when it comes to choosing the setting, we're asking ourselves, what will make the story richer? What will make this person feel like they're actually there, even if it's a location that's completely made up? Because Camille, you know, Haitian people also love a good dream. So we'll also include some dreams in there too. But like, we're trying to think of like, what can we add to the setting? Is it the smell, the sights, something you feel that can help make the story richer and make your character feel like they are really moving through a world that you have created?
Yeah, I love those details. That's, you know, how you build setting. I also talk with my students a lot about how you're always world building, even if it's a realistic place. You have to do the same work. And in my writing, I love to be able to like write about Texas because up until, you know, like even in high school, I was still writing stories that were like set in New York because New York is a cool place. That's where people write stories. I like to get the opportunity to write about Texas, which is where I'm from and where I grew up, but like also show it a little differently than some of the stereotypes. I know that a lot of people have that experience too, in, you know, varying degrees of like, that's not really what my home is like. Yeah, Margarita, you were, maybe setting wasn't exactly it, but you were doing that to some degree with all of your authors, inviting them to share their place, their experiences.
Yeah, but I write too, and I always like to go to where I am, like what I know, what I'm familiar with, and that's pretty much everything that I've ever written has been in the setting that I'm familiar with. And I know, like she was talking about research, that is awesome because I have done like research. Like I love the beach, so like there's a lot of like the water and stuff like that. But like I've always set my stories here where I live, like at our beach or here in my little area. But it's like Anna said, like you always want to put your stories like, you know, oh, like New York or Boston. Like I've only been to Boston one time, so I don't know much about Boston to be able to try to create a world. Although I love Boston, I would never be able to write a story from there because I'm not from there. So I think that a lot of times it helps whenever like if you're just beginning, you know, to write stories or to, you know, set them in the places that you do know. That way you can learn how to write that way.
Yeah, I think we have some more audience questions. I'm excited to hear them. Sarah C. in 3rd grade from Texas. Hey! When you can't think of what to write, what do you do? The eternal question, Sarah. Thank you.
I can go. So like I was saying before, like my North Star being like the theme or whatever is tying everything together, but also especially in college, I would spend a lot of time just like at midnight, just like calling up my mom, and my mom will just talk forever and ever and ever. Like I could just leave the phone on and she doesn't need anyone to interrupt her. So I would just tell her, like, tell me a story, or I would also, you know, talk to my cousins, and my brother inspired one of the stories as well. And yeah, I would just sort of ask them, like, what happened when you were in high school? What is something that happened? And usually at the end of like a conversation, like something would spark. And my mom especially would be like telling me like family gossip and family tea that I would be like, I didn't know that this happened. So yeah, a lot of that definitely went into the book. And I feel like there's a lot of stories in our own families that you don't know a lot about. And there's always something in there to mine from. I think one of the comments from one of the reviews of my book was saying that my book made them want to ask their families about their own histories, which I felt very proud of, because that's definitely a big process for me as like just a person, was getting to know my own family members a lot more.
Just kidding.
Sorry, so Federico V from 4th grade says, if you have too much information, how do you shorten a story? That's a good question. I struggle with this a lot. Who wants to jump in with good advice?
Your
editor
I can
shortened
try. I
your
don't know if it'll be great advice.
I was literally going to say your editor.
Your editor fixes it all. But no.
Yes, absolutely. I find that sometimes, well, I tend to underwrite with novels, but I overwrite with short stories. I don't know why, but with the short stories, I often find that I have 2 paragraphs that are doing very similar things, and so if I can bring those 2 paragraphs down into one, and kind of let go of my darlings, as folks say, right? Like choose the material that's the best of the best. That tends to be how I can kind of figure out how to get things a little bit slimmer in my manuscripts.
I also, like, jokes aside, I think having a reader is a huge way to help you cut down your stories. Just being able to have someone read your story and say like, hey, which parts were like your favorites? I won't cut those. Which parts did you get, they weren't adding as much, or you didn't need them as much? Or even if you're cutting yourself and then you give it to a reader and you're like, is anything missing? Did I take it too far? I do think having another pair of eyes can help you know how well you explained your ideas. And there was something else I was going to say, but I lost it. So yeah, doing those edits, making sure that I was going to say, let go of your darlings is definitely the phrase. That's what we use when we're talking about this. Yes. Has anything else to say on editing? We can definitely move to our last. Yeah. We have one last audience question, I think. What do you find more challenging, dialogue or setting?
Oh,
lightning round, go.
Yes, I would say that setting is a little bit more difficult because I'm thinking of all of the different textures and how can I make it more real. I love writing dialogue because I feel like that's when you get spicy. You can be a little bit more colloquial, talking jargon, just speaking real, one to one. And I just love that. Also, the last question about what to do when you can't write, go outside, just observe the world. And you will get so many ideas. Like people watching, I'm just like, oh, I want to know the story behind that. And then you just write your own thing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that like dialogue is easier for me. I feel like just knowing how people talk and how people are, I can definitely picture that easier in my head. And setting is usually a thing that I might go in like afterwards and like add in more details about afterwards. Whereas like the dialogue, I feel like sometimes comes first and I have to sort of structure the story just around the dialogue itself. But yeah, I feel like everyone's different.
I think I enjoy writing setting more than dialogue. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's quite the right answer to it. I'm like, what do I enjoy versus the other? But dialogue is really, really fun too. But yeah, I think I find more enjoyment in building a scene. It might just be the poet inside of me, like, let me look at the leaves for a while or the birds.
I like setting too, more than dialogue, because sometimes I feel like I write to like the way I talk, and I speak very. Sometimes I question my own language, so that's why I like setting, because you can like you know, Ari said, you could sit outside and observe the leaves, and you can like. My mother also writes very like her settings are so descriptive, and I think that's beautiful in a story.
I like dialogue so much more that I wrote an entire like the transcript of a YouTube video short story. Do you think about theme early or late in the process? Yes.
I know for me with the anthology, I had a theme right at the get-go. Like whenever I decided what I was going to do, I had this is what I wanted. I had a specific theme, voice, goal, everything in mind that I went out and I asked for what I wanted specifically. And then I got stuff in from some people and it didn't match my theme or didn't go with didn't vibe. So I couldn't, you know, I didn't ask them, I didn't use their story because I think theme is very important. And then it kind of sets the whole tone for the whole entire work, whether it's an anthology or a story or a novel, it sets that tone for everything.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. I think of the theme pretty much from the beginning and having that sort of guiding the writing as I go along. And yeah, thank you, Rebecca, for that question. But yeah, I really think it's like important that like everything, like every sentence that you write sort of like goes towards that goal, because it's sort of, you can feel as a reader when you're reading something and it's like there's no goal and it's sort of meandering. And I feel like it's also really cool to like when you get a reader to read your thing, that they're like picking up all of the clues and the crumbs that you're leaving along, and to like know. That's also a good way to like know if you need to cut anything. If people aren't picking up what you're putting down, maybe you have to reword it or like maybe cut it if it's not serving what you wanted with the theme.
I can talk a little bit. Yeah, I love, I think about theme as aboutness too. Like, what is this project about? And then that's like another art term for it, you know? But I think that sometimes for novel, I need a little space to just fall into a story. And I don't always know what it's about. And then it'll start telling me, and then I start paying attention. So sometimes aboutness or theme kind of comes in revision too. And you kind of have to trust that you have your own themes. Like everybody has their own stuff going on too. So it's kind of like the back of your head, Alana K. Arnold talks about. So even if you don't have theme right away, like that's okay. Like write it out, and I bet there's something there. Or even if you list your 5 favorite movies and see what do they have in common, right? That often tells you some of your heart themes that you have naturally that you're wired for. And I think for short story differently, because I pitch short story, right, to somebody, it's like, hey, I need this pitch to go sell it to a publisher. Like I have to write a pitch. So I have to figure out what the story's about, which has been a new thing for me. I usually don't. I'm kind of a pantser of a writer. I kind of, you know, just fall into it and then see what's there and then really build from that. But yeah, so that kind of structure of the short story pitch has been an interesting way of navigating theme. I've needed it before, and then I've actually enjoyed. It's made it a little bit faster to bring out those stories rather than the novel length.
For me and Maritza, I feel like our characters usually come to us first. And then once we're talking with the character, or talking about the character, we think about like what would be happening to her. And then that's how we identify our theme. A lot of times our themes have to deal with sisterhood or family, surprise, surprise. And then we've also realized that we have this underlying, like Ari just said, like your heart theme, which I've never heard of, but I'm going to use that. And it seems that me and Maritza's heart theme is revenge. I don't know how it happened, but so many of our stories have this element of like, oh, I might be like, you know, this soft, kind person, or I'll say what I need to say, but also ultimately like I'm going to get revenge, which I don't know if that's something that we need to unpack, but that's something that really appears in our work. And it's just so fun to write because it shows the like, you know, not everything is so like perfect, imperfect. Like you can have someone who you think this is a nice, good, kind character and they still do something that's bad, and vice versa, and how things are not always so clear cut. And I love a little, you know, a complicated character. So our themes help our characters to shine more brightly.
I love that so much. With my writing students, we sometimes start with character, we sometimes start with setting, we sometimes start with a plot idea or even just an image. I don't think I've had my students start with theme yet, and now I kind of want to. If you're out there watching this in the writing class, hey, write down your 5 favorite movies. see what common themes they have. See if you can write a story about that theme. I'm going to steal this for my sessions tomorrow. Oh, and we have one more. Oh my gosh, we have a secret extra question. Liam would like to ask, what do you get most frustrated about when you write? This is lightning round, like, let's go. Ready? Most frustrated when writing, having to describe things.
Writing with my sister when we don't agree on something.
Like just getting the energy to write and like actually put down the things that are floating around in my brain is probably the hardest part as a procrastinator.
Me as a busy mom and a full-time job, and I'll just find the time to sit down for everybody to leave me alone and let me do what I do.
And Ari, do you have one, or we're just smooth sailing over here? So frustrated that we had to turn our video off. Okay, well, that was a great question and a very realistic question to end on. Thank you so much, everybody. This was a great discussion. I love all of your short stories. Margarita, we need to talk more about your short stories because I didn't know you were writing. Yeah, really quickly, Ari, do you want to tell us something that frustrates you, or do you want to keep the mystery? I think we'll just...
She's having technical.
Yeah, okay, no worries. All right, thank you everyone so much. Thanks for this discussion. Thanks for watching, students, educators, writers. Yay, check out some great anthologies or collections.